people, great, great people, all affected by this tragedy. We're also glad to be back in the heartland with the very, very fine folks of Missouri. And I said to Senator Blunt, and I said to Billy Long on the plane coming in, can I say Missouri, or should I say Missouri? Okay? And they said, whatever you want is okay. So I said, good. But I'm especially pleased to be here in Springfield, the birthplace of a great American icon, the legendary Route 66. Who would have known that? This is the place where the Main Street of America got its start. And this is where America's Main Street will begin its big, beautiful comeback that you are seeing it right now. This is a comeback of historic proportions. You're seeing it happen right now. Right? You're seeing it. We're here today to launch our plans to bring back Main Street by reducing the crushing tax burden on our companies and on our workers. Our self-destructive tax code cost Americans millions and millions of jobs, trillions of dollars, and billions of hours spent on compliance and paperwork. And you have seen what's happening with regulations. They're going fast. We need regulations, but many of them are unnecessary, and they are going fast. That is why the foundation of our job creation agenda is to fundamentally reform our tax code for the first time in more than 30 years. I want to work with Congress, Republicans, and Democrats alike on a plan that is pro-growth, pro-jobs, pro-worker, and pro-American. There is no more fitting place to launch this effort than right here in the American heartland, surrounded by hardworking men and women whose skill, determination, and drive are truly second to none. And by the way, before I start, Ivanka Trump, I see my beautiful daughters in the audience. Stand up, honey. She's working very hard. I'm very proud of Ivanka. For many decades, Route 66 captured the American spirit. The communities along this historic route were a vivid symbol of America's booming industry. Truck drivers hauled made-in-America goods along this vital artery of commerce. Families passed through bustling towns on their way to explore the great American West. And high-quality manufacturing jobs lifted up communities, gave Americans a paycheck that could support a family. Mr. Cook is a great example of the people that do it. Yeah. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Yeah. I think they like you. And provided millions of our fellow citizens with the pride and dignity that comes with work. But in recent years, millions of Americans have watched that prosperity slip away in the rear view mirror. And it wasn't pleasant to watch, especially for me. I would sit back, I was in business, and I could see what was happening. Wasn't good. If we want to renew our prosperity, and to restore opportunity, then we must reduce the tax burden on our companies and on our workers. In the last 10 years, our economy has grown at only around 2% a year. You look at other countries and you look at what their GDP is. They're unhappy when it's 7, 8, 9. And I speak to them, leaders of the countries. How are you doing? Not well, not well. Why? GDP is down to 7%. And I'm saying we were hitting 1% just a number of months ago. So we're going to change that around, folks, that I can tell you, and we're going to change it around fast. And today, a very appropriate day that this should happen, we just announced that we hit 3% in GDP. It just came out. And on a yearly basis, as you know, the last administration, during an 8-year period, never hit 3%. So we're really on our way. If we achieve sustained 3% growth, that means 12 million new jobs and $10 trillion of new economic activity over the next decade. That's some numbers. And I happen to be one that thinks we can go much higher than 3%. There's no reason why we shouldn't. So this is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver real tax reform for everyday, hardworking Americans. And I am fully committed to working with Congress to get this job done. And I don't want to be disappointed by Congress. Do you understand me? Do you understand? Understand. Congress. I think Congress is going to make a comeback. I hope so. Tell you what, the United States is counting on it. Here are my 4 principles for tax reform. First, we need a tax code that is simple, fair, and easy to understand. That means getting rid of the loopholes and complexity that primarily benefit the wealthiest Americans and special interests. Our last major tax rewrite was 31 years ago. It eliminated dozens of loopholes and special interest tax breaks, reduced the number of tax brackets from 15 to 2, and lowered tax rates for both individuals and businesses. At the time, it was really something special. Since then, our tax laws have tripled in size, and the tax code itself now spans more than 2,600 pages, and most of it is not understandable. Tax rates have increased, and special interest loopholes have crept back into the system. The tax code is now a massive source of complexity and frustration for tens of millions of Americans. In 1935, the basic 1040 form that most people file had 2 simple pages of instruction. Today, that basic form has 100 pages of instructions, and it's pretty complex stuff. The tax code is so complicated that more than 90% of Americans need professional help to do their own taxes. This enormous complexity is very unfair. It disadvantages ordinary Americans who don't have an army of accountants while benefiting deep-pocketed special interests. And most importantly, this is wrong. First and foremost, thank you. First and foremost, our tax system should benefit loyal, hardworking Americans and their families. That is why tax reform must dramatically simplify the tax code, eliminate special interest loopholes. And I'm speaking against myself when I do this, I have to tell you. And I might be speaking against Mr. Cook, and we're both okay with it. Is that right? It's crazy. We're speaking, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, you know? But we're doing the right thing. True. And allow the vast majority of our citizens to file their taxes on a single simple page without having to hire an accountant. Second, we need a competitive tax code that creates more jobs and higher wages for Americans. It's time to give American workers the pay raise that they've been looking for many, many years. In 1986, Ronald Reagan led the world by cutting our corporate tax rate to 34%. That was below the average rate for developed countries at the time. Everybody thought that was a monumental thing that happened. But then, under this pro-America system, our economy boomed. It just went beautifully, right through the roof. The middle class thrived, and median family income increased. Other countries saw the success. They looked at us. They saw, what is America doing? What's happening with the United States? And they acted very swiftly by cutting their taxes lower and lower and lower and reforming their tax systems to be far more competitive than ours. Over the past 30 years, the average business tax rate among developed nations fell from 45% to less than 24%, and some countries have an unbelievably low tax, including, by the way, China and some others that are highly competitive and really doing very well against us. They are taking us, frankly, to the cleaners. So we have no choice. We must lower our taxes. And your senator, Claire McCaskill, she must do this for you, and if she doesn't do it for you, you have to vote her out of office. She's got to make that commitment. She's got to make that commitment. If she doesn't do it, just can't do this anymore with the obstruction and the obstructionists. If we don't get tax cuts and reform approved, potentially the biggest ever, we're looking for the biggest ever, jobs and our country cannot take off the way they should. And it could be much worse than that. But at a minimum, they won't take off the way they should. The Dems are looking to obstruct tax cuts and tax reform, just like they obstructed so many other things, including administration appointments and health care. Not one vote. We got not one vote to try and fix health care and get rid of Obamacare. The strategy of our economic rivals has worked. They made their taxes lower, and far lower in many cases than ours, and jobs left our country. Large corporations changed their business models by exporting jobs to other countries and then shipping their goods back to the United States, where they'd make massive profits and they wouldn't be paying tax to us either. So we lost the jobs, we lost the taxes, they closed the buildings, they closed the plants and factories. We got nothing but unemployment. We got nothing. Other businesses, even classic American brands, switched their headquarters to foreign countries. Because of this and other reasons, like weak borders, America remains stuck in the past. Although I have to tell you, we have General Kelly here today. and we stopped 78% going up to 80% on the border traffic coming through in just a short period of time. He's done some job. Whole different world out there right now. Today, we are still taxing our businesses at 35%, and it's way more than that. And think of it, in some cases, way above 40% when you include state and local taxes in various states. The United States is now behind France, behind Germany, behind Canada, Ireland, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, and many other nations. Also, with these countries, and almost every country, we have massive trade deficits, numbers that you would not believe. But this administration is going to fix that one by one. We're fixing it. We're working right now on NAFTA, the horrible, terrible NAFTA deal that took so much business out of your state and out of your cities and towns. And we're working on it. Let's see what happens. Mexico is not happy. But as I told them, you made a lot of money for a lot of years and everybody left you alone. We got to change this deal, and hopefully we can renegotiate it. But if we can't, we'll terminate it and we'll start all over again with a real deal. So when it comes to the business tax, we are dead last. Can you believe that? So this cannot be allowed to continue any longer. America must lead the way, not follow from behind. We have gone from a tax rate that is lower than our economic competitors to one that is more than 60% higher. We have totally surrendered our competitive edge to other countries. We have totally surrendered. We're not surrendering anymore. Ideally, and I say this for our Secretary of the Treasury, we would like to bring our business tax rate down to 15%, which would make our tax rate lower than most countries, but still by no means the lowest, unfortunately, in the world. But it would make us highly competitive. In other words, foreign companies have more than a 60% tax advantage over American companies. They can pay their workers more, sell their products and services at lower cost, and still make more money than their U.S. competitors. We cannot restore our wealth if we continue to put our businesses at such a tremendous disadvantage. We must reduce the tax rate on American businesses so they keep jobs in America, create jobs in America, and compete for workers right here in America, the America we love. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because when businesses compete for labor, your wages will go up. Lower taxes on American business means higher wages for American workers, and it means more products made right here in the USA. When I was growing up, I always used to see the signs, and it was always stamped on the product, made in the USA. You don't see it anymore. We're going to go back to made in the USA. Made in the USA. The third principle for tax reform is a crucial one: tax relief for middle-class families. In a way, and I've been saying this for a long time, they've been sort of the forgotten people. But they're not forgotten any longer, I can tell you that. We will lower taxes for middle-income Americans so they can keep more of their hard-earned paychecks, and they can do lots of things with those paychecks. And that really means buying product ideally made in this country, but that means they'll go out and they'll spend their money, and it will be a beautiful thing to watch. This includes helping parents afford child care and the cost of raising a family. That's so important to Ivanka Trump. Very, very important to everybody in this room, but so important to my daughter. It's one of her real big beliefs, and she's very committed to that. Right, Ivanka? We believe that ordinary Americans know better than Washington how to spend their own money, and we want to help them take home as much of their money as possible and then spend it. So they'll keep their money, they'll spend their money, they'll buy our product, our factories will be moving again, companies are going to move back into our country, jobs are going to prosper, and our country is going to be just like it says on that beautiful red hat. It says, "Make America Great Again." That's what we're going to do. Right? Fourth and finally, we want to bring back trillions of dollars in wealth that's parked overseas. Because of our high tax rate and horrible, outdated, bureaucratic rules, large companies that do business overseas will often park their profits offshore to avoid paying a high United States tax if the money is brought back home. So they leave the money over there. The amount of money we're talking about is anywhere from $3 to $5 trillion. Can you believe that? By making it less punitive for companies to bring back this money, and by making the process far less bureaucratic and difficult, we can return trillions and trillions of dollars to our economy and spur billions of dollars in new investments in our struggling communities and throughout our nation. It's time to invest in our country, to rebuild our communities, and to hire our great American workers. My administration is embracing a new economic model. It's called, very simply, the American model. Under this system, we will encourage companies to hire and grow in America, to raise wages for American workers, and to help rebuild our American cities and communities. That is how we will all succeed and grow together as one team with one shared sense of purpose and one glorious American destiny. So today I'm calling on all members of Congress, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, to support pro-American tax reform. They have to do it. It's time. They have to do it. It is time. I'm calling on Congress to provide a level playing field for our workers and our companies, to attract new companies and businesses to our shores, and to put more money into the pockets of everyday, hardworking people, and also into the pockets of our companies so they can continue to grow and expand. What could possibly be more bipartisan than allowing families to keep more of what they earn and creating an environment for real job and wage growth in the country that we love so much? So let's put, or at least try to put, the partisan posturing behind us and come together as Americans to create the 21st century tax code that our people deserve. If we do this, if we unite in the name of common sense and the name of common good, then we will add millions and millions of new jobs, bring back trillions of dollars, and we will give America the competitive advantage that it so desperately needs and has been looking for so long. It's time. Products made with American hands, American labor, and American grit will once again be delivered throughout the world. That's true. True. It's time. Instead of exporting our jobs, we will export our goods. Our jobs will both stay here in America and come back to America. We'll have it both ways. Millions of struggling citizens will be lifted from welfare to work. They will love getting up in the morning. They will love going to their job. They will love earning a big, fat, beautiful paycheck. They will be proud again. That is the future I want for our people. That is the future I want for America, a nation where we are proud, prosperous, united, and free. Today, I am asking every citizen to join me in dreaming big and bold and daring things, beautiful things, for our country. I am asking every member of Congress, of which we have many with us today, to join me in unleashing America's full potential. I am asking everyone in this room and across the nation to join me in demanding nothing but the best for our nation and for our people. And if we do these things, and if we care for and support each other and love each other, then we will truly make America great again. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Governor, thank you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
President Trump live there in Springfield, Missouri, at a manufacturing plant, laying out his vision for the next big ticket item on this administration's agenda. That is tax reform, calling on his colleagues, both Democratic and Republican in Congress, to move ahead, to come together, to find a way to get this done. Hi, everyone. I'm Amna Nawaz in New York. A lot of headlines out of that and a lot of other things to catch up happening around the country. Let's break it down now with a few of my colleagues. Down in Washington, D.C., Rick Klein and Ali Rogan join me from our D.C. bureau, and Catherine Falders over on the White House North Lawn. Catherine, let's kick it off with you real quick. Look, the president took some heat yesterday on his visit to parts of Texas for not specifically referencing a lot of the folks who were affected or impacted by Hurricane Harvey. He changed that up a little bit, though, today with the very top of his speech, didn't he?
He did. He made a point to address the victims, to address those who have lost their lives in Hurricane Harvey. And as you mentioned, he didn't mention the victims by name at all yesterday during his visit down there. He spoke 3 times and has been getting a little bit of heat for not addressing those victims directly, not addressing the lives lost or the police officer that lost his life. But he did kick off his remarks in Missouri. He made a point to say he honored the courage and devotion, those first responders that have saved countless lives. And he said, to those affected by this storm, we are praying with you. We are here for you every step of the way. He's had to, of course, make these comments again as he received a little bit of flack for them. And this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Melania Trump, the First Lady, said what he didn't say yesterday. She came out and gave a statement specifically addressing those lives and those first responders and those people affected by the storm, Amna. So today, I think he knew that he needed to get this out there and to make these comments.
And Catherine, I know you're on the move, so before we let you go, give us your quick take on what we just heard from the president there. This was the big speech on his big vision for tax reform. Is this where we're going to see the White House's efforts going full force now?
It is, and I know Allie and Rick will touch on this a little bit more, but this is kind of what we expected to hear from the White House today. This wasn't a how we're going to get this done. This is a why are we doing this? Why are we interested in tax reform? He said he wants this pro-American approach. Little details. We didn't expect details from the White House on this, but we do know that this was the first stop in Missouri that he's going to be making. He's going to be going across the country as he launches this kind of tax reform tour. So this is one of the first of many. We expect to see Vice President Mike Pence later today in West Virginia. I was talking to a White House official earlier who said that the Vice President will touch on a lot of these things. He's also kicking off his event today. We'll see him going across the country, probably the two joining each other together. So we will expect to see more of this. He called it the American model. He said he wanted to put partisan posturing behind us as it relates to tax reform. Of course, this was moments after he called out Senator Claire McCaskill, saying if she doesn't go along with tax reform, she should be voted out of office. I'm sure you'll get more on that in a moment. But Amna, you're right. This was the first of many speeches on this issue. We'll hear from the president, according to the White House.
First of many to come. Catherine Falders on the White House North Lawn for us. Thanks, Catherine. Rick Klein, over to you. Let's dig into some of what the president had to say there. So let's just back it up for a second. In April, we got the first sort of sketch of an outline of what we thought tax reform would look like. Did we get any more details today? Do we expect any more anytime soon?
No and no. And I think you heard from the president that he's leaving it to Congress to put this forward. There was a lot more detail in that initial outline, Amna, than anything that we heard today. As Catherine said, this is a lot more about the reasons for tax reform. I was also struck by the partisan edge to his remarks on two different levels. One is we still have an unfolding tragedy in Texas and to a lesser extent Louisiana, as the president referenced. So to get back involved in partisan politics, given that backdrop, I thought was pretty remarkable. Secondly, to go out at an official White House event and say, if the Democratic senator from Missouri doesn't go along with my effort, you should vote her out of office. That is about as partisan as it gets. And we should note, Amna, that there is no bill. There's nothing for her to get behind right now. Even if she were to say, I'm on board, there's nothing to be on board for. There isn't a bill. It's very premature to have conversations about defeating someone for not supporting something that doesn't even exist.
Well, Allie, give me a take on this. How does this plan come together now? Because part of this, a huge part of this, is how we pay for those tax cuts moving forward, right?
That's absolutely right. And Senate Republicans, House Republicans, they're the ones going to be taking the lead on this. The first people who are going to have a chance to actually draft this tax reform bill are members of the House Ways and Means Committee. That's the tax writing body in the House. And you might not know this, but actually the chairman of that committee has been doing his own road trip selling his vision for tax reform over the past couple weeks. So you've actually kind of had this dual track President Trump beginning his PR push today, but Chairman Kevin Brady of the House Ways and Means Committee, as well as Speaker Ryan, have spent this entire August recess on the road selling their plan. So the question, though, remains, when are they actually going to start putting pen to paper and drafting this bill? The devil's in the details. President Trump's speech today was incredibly general. Who's against lowering income tax rates? Who's against increasing competitiveness? That's like saying you're for free chocolate ice cream for everybody. That's not something that's going to get a lot of disagreement. The devil
is
in
vanilla, just for the record.
Okay, so
right
you would
now.
be against that.
Okay, just saying.
Okay, so we'll put Rick Klein in the anti-chocolate
Rick's
ice cream
just being
camp.
obstructionist here, you guys.
I think that's what it is. You're a
Vote me out.
typical obstructionist. But the devil's in the details. There's a lot of lobbyists who are going to be on the Hill campaigning against certain provisions that go against their industries. Gary Cohn, the White House chief economic advisor, said yesterday that he expects the committees to start shaping and releasing a bill within 3 to 4 weeks. In Congress years, which are even longer than dog years, that's not a lot of time at all. And remember, Amna, they've got plenty more on their plate. They've got the debt ceiling. They've got the government shutdown to contend with. And they've got Harvey funding. They're going to need to pass some emergency funds for Harvey recovery. So a lot on their plates. And it's not exactly clear where tax reform fits on the congressional calendar coming up.
No, they've got a really busy schedule. They have a ton of competing interests that people are going to be fighting for. They also have the reality of economics they're bumping up against. Last I heard, some of the plans to repeal and replace would help to offset some of the costs of the tax cut to help with the government revenue. 3% sustained GDP growth would also help with that. And the president rightly noted there, this second quarter, we did revise up to a higher than expected GDP growth of 3%. But the last time we had 2 consecutive quarters of 3% GDP growth was 2014. So what are you hearing from people on the Hill about how this actually comes together? Where do those details come from?
Well, Amna, this is exactly the reason why congressional leaders wanted to accomplish health care first. Because, as you mentioned, that was going to take care of some of the tax provisions that help pay for the rest of tax reform. Now that that hasn't happened, it becomes incredibly harder because, as you mentioned, if you're going to be implementing tax cuts like the Trump administration wants to, like most congressional Republicans want to, you have to find a way to offset those that less revenue that you're going to be getting. They were going to be doing some of that with some of the Obamacare tax provisions that they were getting rid of. That is no longer the case, so they're going to have to find a lot more areas to play a little seesaw here.
Rick Klein, the ghost of repeal and replace lingers long and large over this. Do they have a shot at making this work?
I think on health care, we're not going to see that anytime soon unless there's a change in balance in the Senate. There's some scenarios where a senator joins the cabinet, a Democratic senator, or Bob Menendez is about to go on trial in New Jersey. You need something like that to upset the balance. As Ali knows so well from covering those late nights, they did not have the votes. Tax reform in some ways is easier because what Republican isn't going to agree to these principles on tax reform? In some ways, though, it's harder because you're going to need 60 votes. This is actual legislation. This isn't something you can just do through the budget process and get the 50 votes. So you actually need 8 Democrats to come over. Top on that list is the person that President Trump was so directly targeting, Claire McCaskill. It's just hard for me to imagine from a political perspective that that kind of a threat, and it was a threat, an overt threat, beat her if she doesn't support us, is going to be persuasive for those members of Congress, particularly when you see a president with lagging approval ratings. So I feel like for people that are looking for signals on Capitol Hill, how is the president going to handle this that's different than health care? What's the predicate he's going to lay down? How is the argument going to be made? I don't think there was going to be a lot of optimism out of this speech that this is going to be the kind of game changer he would need to get a legislative agenda back on track.
All right, let's broaden this out a little bit because there's a couple other headlines I want to make sure we touch on. And let's bring in our colleague over at the Pentagon right now. Stephanie Ramos joins us live from there now. And Stephanie, before we dig into a couple of other headlines we've already heard about and want to learn some more about, you have just come from a Pentagon briefing, and there was a little bit of news on that. Tell me what you learned there.
Yeah, absolutely, Amna. Well, this was a very highly anticipated press briefing here at the Pentagon. It was the first on-camera briefing by Chief Spokesperson Dana White. And the DoD said they wanted to hold this briefing to bring transparency to the amount of U.S. troops on the ground in Afghanistan. And they announced just a few moments ago that 11,000 U.S. troops are currently on the ground in Afghanistan. Now, what is the significance of that number? Well, since last July, we knew that 8,400 U.S. troops, officially, that was the official number, that 8,400 U.S. troops were on the ground there in Afghanistan. So we now know that since last summer, that number has grown by a couple of thousand, now stands at 11,000 U.S. troops there on the ground.
And Stephanie, do we know why there was that gap in numbers, why the understanding was one number versus what it actually is?
Well, this is something that current Secretary of Defense Mattis inherited from President Obama. He put in place the FML, which we heard from in this briefing. It stands for Force Management Level, which is basically the official putting out there the official troop cap number that are allowed in that country. So. Again, last summer is when we were told 8,400. We now know it's 11,000 U.S. troops there on the ground in Afghanistan. Reporters just a few moments ago were asking the chief spokesperson, Dana White, there, how many troops will be sent now to Afghanistan under President Trump's new strategy. That number has not been released, and it probably won't be released for quite some time, but we do know how many troops are there on the ground right now. We also do know that Secretary of Defense Mattis, he initially wanted to send up to 3,900 troops under this new strategy to Afghanistan, but we now understand that he wants revisions to that new plan. He has asked his joint staff to come up with the revisions based on the number of troops that are currently there on the ground. And the DoD is, what we gathered just a few moments ago, they want to provide this transparency to the public, and moving forward, they'll review what's in place in Iraq and Syria and provide that same number, or provide numbers to how many troops are there on the ground as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about our Commander-in-Chief and the Defense Secretary. President Trump tweeted this morning, obviously this is among rising tensions with North Korea, the South Korean Defense Chief visiting Washington to meet with SecDef Mattis as well. This is what the President had to say this morning. Quote, the U.S. has been talking to North Korea and paying them extortion money for 25 years. Talking is not the answer. I want to play a quick soundbite for you guys and then come back to our team in Washington after that. This is a little bit of sound from General Mattis, the Defense Secretary, of course, in his meeting with his counterparts from South Korea. He was asked a question specifically about this tweet, whether or not diplomatic options were done with. And this is what he had to say.
Said that you seek a diplomatic solution with North Korea. The president this morning tweeted that talking isn't the answer. Are we out of diplomatic solutions for North Korea?
No.
What additional diplomatic solutions could be taken? And then for Minister Song, what additional U.S. military support might South Korea need to be able to increase pressure on North Korea?
Now you're testing us here, We bring you up here to take pictures. No, we're never out of diplomatic solutions. We continue to work together, and the minister and I share a responsibility to provide for the protection of our nations, our populations, and our interests, which is what we are here to discuss today.
So Rick Klein, over to you on this. Let's be clear now here. General Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson have been consistent on this. They have always said they would like to continue with a diplomatic tack when it comes to North Korea. But in the face of the president's tweet this morning, that's a pretty bold counter statement to just say no.
Talk about lack of diplomacy. That's not a diplomatic answer. He wasn't even trying to explain or cast any kind of context around President Trump's very stark tweet. Of course, President Trump has said the opposite as well. He has said he wants to talk to the North Koreans, pursue diplomatic solutions. So a lot of this is bluster. But I think you're seeing some very real splits inside this White House, inside this administration, not just among senior staff, but now among some of the top cabinet secretaries, including General Mattis and including Rex Tillerson, who've been saying things that are at least indirectly critical of President Trump, and now seeming to contradict what the president just put out there on Twitter. They have to deal with this in a very real way. And I don't discount the possibility that President Trump is playing a three-dimensional chess here. He wants the North Koreans to receive this in a certain way. He wants the world community to understand it in a certain way. But when it comes down to the cabinet level, the people that actually have to use those words, put it into policy, I think you're seeing some pretty stark divisions that are starting to emerge. These are real splits.
Stephanie, there's another issue at which the two have seemingly come sort of at odds, although it seems to be very much evolving. But when it comes to the president's proposed ban on transgender military members, we know that there's been some communication between the White House and the Department of Defense about exactly how that should be carried out. Just bring us up to speed on what the Department of Defense's latest stance is on how that's going to be implemented.
Well, Amna, Secretary of Defense Mattis has said, he put out a statement yesterday saying that he has until February to come up with a plan on how to deal with transgender people who are currently serving in the military. So by doing that, he says a panel will be put together to figure out how best to do this. There are transgender people that are currently serving in the military. They will continue to serve despite President Trump's guidance. So as of right now, Secretary Mattis has until February to come up with a plan on how to do just that, how to handle that community that is currently serving.
Rick and Allie, over to you on this, because what struck me about that statement Stephanie just mentioned from General Mattis was a line about how basically until then, everything remains exactly the same, status quo.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of leaders on the Hill on both sides of the aisle, this really hasn't been an issue for them for a long time. when the Obama administration announced that it was changing the policy to allow transgender people to serve in the military. That was something that there were a few people that expressed some concerns about the effect on troop cohesion, but it wasn't a major lightning bolt because, frankly, Congress had a lot of other major issues to worry about. The fact that Secretary Mattis is delaying this implementation for at least 6 months, I think is going to be met with not incredibly strong responses from most members of Congress, save folks like Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who has expressed great concern about this policy. But frankly, Congress just has a lot more on its plate. I would say that in terms of the war in Afghanistan, that is something that there's going to be a little more discussion of. Folks like Senator John McCain, Senator Jeff Flake, Tim Kaine of Virginia, they want a new authorization for the use of military force that essentially allows Congress to say they give the blessing to the commander-in-chief to continue the involvement there of American troops. The Afghanistan war has continued to be authorized under, at this point, AUMFs are called, that are more than 15 years old. And it's something that keeps coming up in Congress. It doesn't really have a fever pitch yet of support, but it's definitely going to be something that remains part of the conversation when Congress comes back next week.
And Amna, if I could jump in, the way that this policy was promulgated on the transgender ban, this was a tweet. This caught everybody off guard, including the Pentagon. They didn't know it was coming. President Trump woke up one morning about a month ago, put this out there, and said that there would be a ban on transgender individuals serving in the military. You can't make policy with tweets, and that's where Secretary Mattis and others come in. Is they've got to actually deal with this on the ground. They've got to deal with the fact that there are individuals who are currently serving. It's one thing to say we won't recruit any further. It's one thing to say we won't allow medical expenses to be reimbursed. But it's another thing to say we're going to have to go kick people out, and that's where what it comes down to. And I think the delay is going to highlight a lot of the inconsistencies that are inherent in that policy, and maybe soften it pretty considerably from the president's very clear statement in a tweet.
Rick, before I let you go, I want to get you on one last thing here. It feels like a very long time ago we were talking about the president potentially threatening a government shutdown over funding for his border wall. It's like news years away, which are even longer than Congress years and dog years now. Is that still a possibility?
It is, according to him, but I think there's little appetite for that on Capitol Hill. And Ali knows this in talking to members and staffers. There's nobody that wanted to shut down the government over the border wall before Hurricane Harvey hit. After Hurricane Harvey, the idea of a government shutdown is a horrible idea. I think there's a consensus around that you wouldn't do anything to try to stand in the way. And in fact, John Carl and I talked to a leading conservative yesterday, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. He even wants a so-called clean spending bill. It doesn't include border wall funding. Put that fight off to another day. I think that's one sense that Harvey has sort of cooled the sentiments around a big confrontation around the border wall. The president can still say it, and he was asked about it earlier this week and says he doesn't want it, but it could still be there. But I don't think if you went around Capitol Hill, even if many of Donald Trump's strongest allies will tell you, yes, it's worth shutting down the government.
And I would say that was the case even before Harvey. This has never been something that any leadership on any side wants to do. The statements that have been coming out about the notion that they might shut down the government over funding for the border wall have been met with the most, they've been diplomatic statements, but they've been about as strongly as you can say, heck no, never happening, as you could in a congressional press conference, Amna.
Heck no. That's reading between the lines there. Ali Rogan,
I would say.
Rick Klein, and Stephanie Ramos. Thanks so much, you guys. Always good to talk. And thanks to all of you for watching as well. Remember, you can go to abcnews.com anytime for continuing coverage on all of those stories and many more. Stay with us here for your latest live news. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz, and I'll see you back here soon.